Love it. This last week was the genius of Jesus and the genius of grace. And it was really, honestly, for me, it felt like a kind of a replay of what we've been chatting about in our Ephesians series, which I've really been enjoying and talking about the grace of God. Um, but it was kind of interesting. It talks about there's grace in the form of or grace in form of like grace being an actual thing that you can receive, but then there's also grace in favor. When you give grace or when grace is given to you when it's undeserved, it looks a lot like favor or you're being favorited in some way. A couple of the notes I wrote down. Um, it's the manifestation of the divine, transcendent in works. It's making greatness and genius look easy. It makes what's hard for some people look easy, in the sense of like it almost being like second nature. When you're walking in grace, it's just like doors open for you. Um, and I think what's really interesting throughout the book so far, the author has really tried to kind of parallel geniuses that we would see, throughout our lives or throughout history and Jesus, and how like we have these genius characters who are really good at whatever it is that they are really good at, whether it's music or art or math, science, all the things, the incredible writers, whatever it is. But he notes that like they're really good at those things, but then they are not exactly great people, which is it's kind of funny. It's like you're a genius in this area, but then as like a person, it's like it's almost like there's something wrong with you or something off. You can be massively gifted, but be horrible. Um, let me, oh yeah, you're good. Sorry, Robel's had to restart his system. Yeah, you're good, man. I'll add you back on. Um, but it's almost like it's kind of funny because sometimes I feel like we can look at Jesus and the way that he acts, and we can be like, "What's wrong with you? Like, why is it that you are like acting kind of this crazy way?" Like I remember the first time that I read about Jesus flipping the tables, in a way like there's one account in John where he's like running around and whipping people with a whip to get them out of the temple. And then there's the other account in, I believe it's in Matthew or Luke, I can't remember, where he's flipping the tables and like this is a house of prayer and all the things. Um, it's a sometimes you can think like, what's wrong with this guy? Like I thought he was this guy of love, and then we see on the other side, the flip side, he's just this kind of crazy, almost dysfunctional person. And it almost makes you think that like to walk in a level of genius or to walk in a level of this crazy grace, that it should come with some level of dysfunction. Um, where the gifting and genius of the world separates us and actually creates difficulty in connecting with others. Um, and I think sometimes we can get into this mindset when we recognize the grace that we've received, and it can actually lean us into an elitist mentality. And we see this often in the church, and we even see this with the Pharisees, where there's this knowledge that they have of God, and then they lean into this place of like, well, now because of this knowledge, I'm superior. And it can really put us in a tough place if we don't allow the grace to invade our hearts. If grace is just knowledge, if grace is just, the access and the authority and all the things that we know we have because of the word of God, if it's only in our heads, it puts us into this position of superiority and in a way separates us from being able to actually give grace to others, or keeps us from giving grace to others because we haven't actually experienced grace. We just have the knowledge of his grace. Which I found that really interesting that the author kind of points this out, where when we only have knowledge, it actually creates more difficulty with connecting with others. and being able to show that grace. Um, but again, Jesus's genius was in how he related to others. His genius was in how he bestowed grace upon others. Um, and again, oftentimes we need grace the most when we're under fire or in difficult moments. That's when we're desperate for grace. That's when we there's again many times walks in my life and moments in my life where I've only gone to God when I needed something, and it's His grace. I wasn't necessarily deep in my relationship with him. It was really a genie in the bottle that I'm rubbing, please, three wishes, take all this away, make my life easy. Um, we need grace when it's difficult, but then when we can actually recognize his grace, um, when things are good, when things are easy, and grow in that relationship, it actually transforms us, um, and transforms our hearts. It's interesting how oftentimes conflict arises because of miscommunication, or maybe not understanding the context. But then when the context is cleared up, we have to give grace in order to move forward. But what would it look like for us to give grace and be full of grace at the start of conflict, when we're in the fire, when we're in the difficulty? Because again, I think when I was reading this, I was thinking about marriage and thinking about relationships and even times with my wife. I feel like sometimes we can get into heated discussions, as we like to say, and it can escalate very, very quickly. And sometimes because there's not grace in the moment and there's not understanding, we allow miscommunications to go unchecked, and then it continues to grow and grow and grow and escalate. Um, and instead of giving grace and trying to understand, we have to blow things up before we can actually give grace. And I feel like that can happen a lot of times where it's easier just to get offended and misunderstand, um, and not try to understand the context rather than giving grace. But again, it's in the difficulty and it's when we're under fire that we need grace the most. And so one of the questions is, what would it look like for us to give grace at the start of conflict or at the start of difficulty, and not just after the fact? What if forgiveness and grace began the conversation when we get into difficult moments? Um, and oftentimes we hold each other hostage. We can hold each other hostage with guilt and shame, to how we should live, when God never does this. Grace believes in your future and gives to what we could become if we began to walk with God. Um, Again, going back to the beginning of like grace being a form and grace being an actual tangible thing, and grace then also being favor that we give. Um, I think when we give grace, we can give grace sometimes to people's potential, um, and we can give understanding to who we believe God believes and God knows someone to be. And again, I think it's a really deep thing to look at. Um, but like, how many times have we received grace when we didn't deserve it, but that grace was given, maybe by someone close to us? They gave it to you because, not just because they loved you, but because they believed in you and they believed in who you were becoming and who you could be. And so that's why they gave you grace. And that's why they, in that moment, extended that hand. And I think that's a hard thing, for us to give to others, but it's an even greater thing to wrestle on our own. Again, we talked about it with Ephesians, but God, He lavished His grace upon us. And I believe that grace was given to us, speaking to who we could become. And for when we look at it in our relationship with him, we receive it undeserved, right? But when we look at all the times where people give us grace and, oh yeah, everything's all good, it's all good, and then the mistakes happen again and again and again, God just continues to pour out his grace and say, no, the invitation is still there. I still want you. I still desire for you to grow and for you to become who I've created you to be. Um, and it's just I don't know. I'm kind of even at a loss for words in talking about his grace because it really is a form and thing to experience when God gives us his grace and bestows it upon us. Um, and it's not something that we have to earn. It's a gift that we were meant to walk in, but it's also a gift we're meant to embody for others, is to give that grace to others. And again, we move and when it comes back to grace being a thing of favor, things become easy to us when we start to recognize the grace that we're given. There's almost like a confidence in our heart. And again, it can be an elitist thing if it's just in our mind, but when it's transformed our hearts and we can move in that grace, there's just this confidence that we get to walk in and move in where it's like, man, the stuff that used to be difficult and stuff that used to be hard, it's becoming easy now. The temptations, I was talking to somebody about this last week, where it's like when we are so locked in on Jesus and when we're so like infatuated in love with him and we recognize in our hearts the grace that he's given us, like the temptations that used to just throttle my life now seem like insignificant. The things that used to, excite me, the sinful things that used to like turn the passions of my heart, they just don't phase me or hit like they used to. And it's because of his grace transforming our hearts that's even possible for us because we're being transformed. The word that I have been studying recently is metamorphosis. A metamorphosization, is that a word? I don't know. A transformation that's taking place in our lives because of his grace. Um, and my hope this week, um, if it as you've read it and dwell on it, is what does a transformed life look like? Or what could your life look like if you were able to even just a portion of comprehension, being able to comprehend his grace? Um, I'm looking at just again looking at my notes here, the woman that was caught in adultery, um, and everyone's like getting all riled up, ready to stone her. Um, I wish I could have been there. I wish I could know. I wish we could know what Jesus wrote in the sand in that moment. My gosh, I can't wait. Like so many questions I have for the Lord when we get to see him face to face in heaven. Um, but I in that moment when he says, whoever's without sin, throw the first stone. Again, it's grace that he's bestowing upon her. But I honestly think, and even the author kind of mentions this, he's really extending grace to them in that moment of like, hey, you're in the wrong here. Um, but I think if he had said like, you're wrong, you're out of line, it would have only escalated things more. It was the grace upon Jesus's life in that moment that he was able to even have the wisdom and have the words to say what needed to be said to de-escalate. And I think again, that's going back to the question of like, what would it look like if we had grace at the beginning of conflict? It's the grace that gives us wisdom in those moments, like Jesus was able to speak and everything just fizzled out. It was the grace of Jesus that arrested them. I think the book says arrested them in their own hypocrisy. And I think for us, it's not a fun thing to admit, but like there are many times where we are hypocrites where we say one thing but we do another. But it's his grace that arrests us and says, "Hey, come back to me." It's an invitation for you to turn from all of this. You don't need to continue escalating in your anger or your offense or your sinful behavior, but you can come back. Um, yeah, it's the grace of Jesus that arrests us in our own hypocrisy. It meets us in our own sin, even when we try to hide it. It's His grace that continues to invite us back to the table with Him, even when sin tries to isolate us. All accusation, condemnation, and shame was dropped in that moment because of grace. With Jesus's minimal acts and words, He broke the guilt and actually opened a doorway to come face to face with grace and face to face with God in the process. It's that it's an invitation. Again, Jesus made it look so easy. Um, and it's kind of funny because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy for us to be judgmental and for us to attack. Um, but it takes even more to have grace for your accusers and grace for stubborn sinners. But this grace is available to us. Uh, to see the law of God, it really leads to grace at the end of the day. Loving your neighbor as yourself. Religious laws and rules were a crutch for those who could not practice or accept grace. I thought that was like a huge thing for me, like recognizing that all these guys that needed to follow all the rules and then also find ways to cut corners around the rules were really not interested in grace at all. They were really just more interested in looking the part rather than being the part. And I think when we can truly accept grace, again, following the rule of God, following his laws, following the things that he has called us to be obedient in, when we walk in grace, those things become easy versus us having to like strive in our flesh. Um, where again, the religious learned they had to earn their salvation and earn their faith rather than just believe and follow him with our lives and walk in obedience. Um, it is so tough to walk in obedience when we do it without the spirit of grace in our lives. Um, yeah, we may have experienced the grace of God and experienced his call to us to come home when we've drifted. And honestly, for me, that is one of the most overwhelming feelings when we've drifted off course, but Jesus still beckons us to come. And that's when I get all crybaby in my faith, and that's when I'm like, God, why are you so good when I've been so wrong? And it's not a shaming or a guilting moment. It's the conviction of the Holy Spirit and His grace that continues to call us to more and call us to the right pathway. And again, I've known many people, um, good friends of mine, who have turned away from God because they couldn't wrap their mind around His grace. And I think too, as we're reaching others and as we're discipling people in our lives, it is a hard thing to comprehend that no matter how many times we, in a way, spit in the face of God or reject Him in some kind of way, or we choose other idols over Him, He still beckons us and He still invites us to come home, just like the prodigal son. And He still is willing to put a ring on our finger and put His robe around us and call us son, call us daughter, even when we've ran from Him. And one of my good buddies just couldn't comprehend that God would do something like that. Because again, it's hard to receive grace when we don't feel like anyone else has given us grace, or when we find it hard to give grace to others who have wronged us. And that, I think that's maybe one of the deeper things that we need to wrestle with, and even accepting the grace of God. You know, one of the things my kids and we've started doing is every morning we're reading together the Lord's Prayer, and it's like a repeat after me moment. It's actually it's beautiful. It's such a cool thing to see, especially with Levi, like knowing the words now. It's my youngest. He's almost 4, and there's that line, God forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And we talk about, you know, receiving the forgiveness of God. Well, how can God forgive us if we're not willing to forgive others? How can his grace extend to someone who is unable or unwilling, I shouldn't say unable, but just unwilling to give grace to others? And I think that's something that we have to wrestle with, is maybe asking ourselves, who do we need to extend grace to in our lives? Is there somebody that maybe we're holding hostage in our hearts, and because of what they did, what they said, the offense that has been built up? And I know for me that's something that I continue to wrestle with. It's like it feels like constantly I'm having to forgive. Constantly I'm having to forgive and let that person go in my heart, because again, the energy that I'm wasting being offended and upset and hurt, um, is really keeping me from my relationship with God at the end of the day. And it's not even doing any damage that I may want to inflict in my flesh on those people. Um, but what if the grace we have yet to experience is the grace that we give ourselves? Kind of going off of what we're already talking about, but I think many times it's hard to accept the grace of God because we haven't given ourselves grace. Or maybe there's a standard in which we're holding ourselves to, um, and we continue to beat ourselves up again and again. Um, I feel like that this is a word, I know it's a word for myself, but it's a word for many of us, um, that we have to give ourselves grace. And we cannot continue to cycle and do, and I think my dad has said this before. It's like we're doing the work of the enemy for him by beating ourselves up and continuing to not give grace, and or not allow ourselves to accept his grace for our lives. Um, what if the reason that we can't forgive others is because we can't forgive ourselves for what we've done, what we've said, what we've gone through, the mistakes we've made? We continue to dwell on those things. Um, and again, maybe I don't know why I put this down. I said maybe we have to maybe we feel like we had to struggle longer than somebody else. And so that's why we're holding them hostage, and we feel like they need to struggle. We want justice. But if God can forgive us, maybe we can forgive ourselves, and maybe we can forgive others. And I wrote this: what if the grace of God unlocks the grace that we can give ourselves so that we can move forward from the mistakes that we've made, that we can move forward from the patterns that need to be broken? But it's his grace, when we truly begin to allow it to transform our hearts, it's again, it's what unlocks the grace that we can give ourselves, which then allows us to give grace to others. Um, but last question that I kind of want to hit. Um, again, I think probably the biggest question is, are we forgiving ourselves? Are we walking in grace and allowing grace to be given to ourselves and just dwelling in that? Um, but another good question would be, how are we giving grace to others? And what does that look like in our faith walk, in our journey? Um, and how are we continuing to dwell on his grace and become a dwelling place for his presence and for his grace in our lives? Because I'll tell you just personally in my walk with the Lord, when I sit and I dwell on his grace, it is for me, it's almost always an emotional experience where I just begin to weep and joy floods my heart. Um, Gratitude fills my soul, and that is probably one of the most transformative ways to start my day is to just recognize his grace. You know, I believe in repentance and turning from our patterns and the sins that we may be engaging in. But on the days where I'm not necessarily repenting, I'm just spending time with him. One of the first things I do is I just rest in his grace and allow his grace to overwhelm me. Because when I recognize that I'm being given this and I don't deserve it, that he calls me son, that he calls me his child, and that I have access now to him, it changes everything. It changes my whole perspective, and it gives me the ability to again move in areas and things that I never thought I could. Um, this is kind of a cool story. We didn't really share it on Sunday. I shared it with our Go team, um, which I don't know if any of you guys were there that morning. During our trip, we uh, we actually had our flight canceled on the way back. So we were supposed to fly out at midnight on Friday. It was Friday evening. We were there at 9 p.m. We're supposed to fly out Saturday morning at midnight. And flight was canceled. And because of my dad's status with the airline, because of his credit card and his points and all the stuff, we actually had all of our tickets on the Premier Access booking. So like as if we were flying first class or business class or something. And so we were in the first class line and everybody else was in the regular line. And because of his Premier Access, because of the grace and favor, you know, that he was walking in because of his card and all the stuff, all 12 of us, along with one other person, were were the only ones that were able to book a flight to actually leave the country that morning, while everybody else had to wait until 4 p.m. on Saturday. Because we found this out as we're up at the front counter and we're like, you got to do something. We got to get back before Sunday. You know, we got church, we got all the stuff, all the things. I'm never gonna book a travel that we have to be back by Sunday ever again. We're gonna fly back on Monday from now on for all I care. Um, but it was just like this crazy stressful moment, and like we're all getting emails saying that the airport is shutting down at 2 a.m. for maintenance. So from 2 a.m. to 2 p.m., the whole airport was going to shut down. No flights, not domestic, not international, nothing. And they're like, the only flight that you're going to be able to make is at 4 p.m. Saturday. And then we'd have to overnight in Houston. And then we wouldn't get back to Nashville until like 9:30 on Sunday morning. And again, we're in the Premier Access line. Everybody else is getting hotel vouchers and they're rebooking us on a different airline, all because of the Premier Access that we have. And I love that it was called Premier Access and not like first class because it's so biblical in this moment of like, because of the access that we have, because of who our father is or who my father was, you know, in that moment, we got to fly when everybody else had to get a hotel and spend the entire Saturday before they could actually fly out. And it's like it was such a cool moment. Like we had all of our team like literally in the line praying. You know, we had one girl who had actually she actually had like a Catholic prayer book and was like reading different prayers in this book. And I was just like, I don't care, just pray something. You know, we need God to come through in this moment. But literally the only people that got booked for flights were the people in that line. And it was us and one other person, and everybody else had to stay. And it just like it's such a beautiful story for us in our walk with the Lord that because of his grace, because he calls us son and daughter, and because we follow after him and we choose to obey him, his grace gives us access where nobody else has. Gives us wisdom in moments of conflict and difficulty, gives us favor when everybody else is having to again rebook flights and have all kinds of issues or struggle. We're able to walk in favor because of him. And again, it's not this confidence that's meant to be, you know, cocky, like, oh, look at me, you know, look who my dad is, you know, it's not that. It's, man, he my father loves me so much that he chose me and chose to save me and chose to continue to transform me to become more and more like him. And in that process, I get to do things that nobody else does. I get to hear things that nobody else does. I get to experience his love like nobody else does. And the beauty of it too is that that transformative grace is something that we can use to transform the world around us. When we can give grace and we can give love, again, even going back to the empathy conversation, when we can be empowered by his grace to love and empathize and then move that into action, move that into love and truth, we can see lives transformed. Like literally right before this call, I get a call and I'm like in the middle of marriage counseling on the phone with this couple. And it was just it was kind of wild. They don't go to our church, but they were friends of mine, and they're just like arguing on the phone back and forth, and I'm just like, Lord, I need you because I don't know what to tell them right now. Like this is wild, and just immediately like I'm talking and the Holy Spirit is speaking and I'm like, oh, that's actually really good what I just said. Like, whoa, I should be a marriage counselor. But it's like it's the Holy Spirit in those moments. It's his grace, you know, and we have access to that in those times of need. And again, it's just so beautiful, so powerful. Um, but again, I want us to dwell on that. And I think it's something that we should be daily dwelling on is his grace, not just in the form of favor, but in a form of its own that can transform us and use us to advance his kingdom. Um, so yeah, I'm excited. That's all I got. I love you guys. Um, this has just been a really, really great book. Um, and it has brought up a lot of questions that I think again we just need to ask ourselves. I think because of social media and because of all the shows and all the things that we can watch and entertain ourselves with, we don't always come face to face with difficult questions that actually grow us. Um, but that's honestly been the coolest part of this book for me is wrestling with some of these questions and wrestling with what it looks like to be a dwelling place and what it looks like to be like Jesus truly in his genius.